All right, we have got, to round out this afternoon, an august panel here. In case they've been introduced to you before, I'm going to read their introductions again. This is a really great panel. If we had a panel like this on Meet the Press or C-SPAN every day, this country would be in a lot better shape. Start with Bill Jasper. William Jasper is a senior editor at the New American Magazine. Over the past 3 decades, Jasper has researched and written extensively on foreign and domestic politics, terrorism, national security, education, immigration, and constitutional issues. Really a brilliant polyglot here. The culture war, and most notably, the United Nations. His renown as an investigative journalist and insightful analyst on a wide array of topics has made William Jasper a frequent and highly sought-out guest on many radio and TV programs. We've also got my dear colleague at Freedom Project and a remarkable international correspondent, Alex Newman, an international journalist, educator, and author, currently serving as a foreign correspondent for the New American Magazine, holds a BS degree in journalism with an emphasis on economics at international relations, as well as an AA degree in foreign languages, and he speaks a lot of them. His work has been cited by major media outlets around the world, and Alex is a frequent guest on radio shows, TV programs, and at conferences. He and his family currently split their time between Europe and the United States, and he works with us at Freedom Project Media. And we, of course, have Art Thompson. And what I love about these 3 gentlemen is they can speak, they can write, they can interview. They're all unique in that every aspect of public speaking and public presentation, they are really gifted at them. And Art Thompson, of course, attended the University of Washington and the Washington Military Academy before going into business for himself successfully. He was actively involved in local politics and served as an officer in the Select Reserve Force of the Army and the National Guard. Thompson joined the John Birch Society in May of 1964 and has held virtually every position in the organization. He is currently the CEO and resides in Appleton, Wisconsin with his lovely wife, Joanne. So this is a panel largely on the machinations of the deep state. And to keep it moving quickly, our panelists are going to try to give pithy answers. I've got a series of questions from you, the audience, and if time allows, we can expand it a little bit too. So to get right to it, here's our first audience question.
I like to make a correction, though. You said this is an August panel. These 2 guys are August. I'm December.
All right. Question number 1. Please compare and contrast for us the John Birch Society use of the term deep state with those who originated the phrase, for example, former GOP staffer Mike Lofgren or ex-CIA agent Phil Giraldi. If it seems as if they focus more on military surveillance complex issues, how would you define, in a John Birch Society context, what exactly the deep state is? Alex, start with you.
Is my mic working? Maybe not. Do I need to touch something? Can you guys hear me all right? Okay, very good. Well, Mike Lofgren was a congressional staffer. I think he spent 30 years on Capitol Hill with a top secret security clearance, and he was the one to really popularize the use of the term deep state even before Trump became president. And when he talks about the deep state, he condensed it all into an essay, which is very good. And he talks about the national security state, the military, the law enforcement agencies, the NSA, which is spying on everyone. But he also brings in Wall Street and some of the other nodes of power in the United States. And I think he's got the right idea. Unfortunately, I think he misses the bigger picture. If you guys read the Deep State special issue, we talk about what we call the deep state behind the deep state, which I think is even more relevant. We talk about the semi-secret organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg, and then the actual secret societies like Bohemian Grove, Skull and Bones, and so on. So I think Mike Lofgren and some of the others who talk about the shadow government, they're providing a valuable service by highlighting these issues, but they're not getting the connections because a lot of these guys from the deep state that they identify are also members of the CFR. They're also attendees at Bilderberg. And when you map out all the connections, you get a much fuller picture. And I think that's one of the big things we can do in the John Birch Society is take advantage of this atmosphere and educate people who are already concerned about this regarding the real nature of the deep state beyond just what we're hearing about on television.
Bill Jasper.
Building on what Alex has just said, this is what has always distinguished the John Birch Society from virtually all of the other conservative and neoconservative groups, and that is the willingness or the insistence by the society and our writers to pinpoint the brain trust. Who is it that's behind these various apparatuses? We know that what many of these other authors refer to, in fact, some of our friends, some of the books that we've given friendly reviews to, they will talk about the deep state as if it's just this kind of amorphous bureaucracy within the government, and the conservatives tend to identify it with Democrats. It's those nasty Democrats who have burrowed into the government at all levels and all agencies. Well, we know that it has gone on from Republican, so-called Republican, to Democrat and back to Republican again. What is it that keeps this deep state going? And the John Birch Society has focused on primarily the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and other groups, the tax-exempt foundations, which are the ones that we can identify publicly as calling the shots, the semi-secret roundtable organizations, etc. And to me, that's the real distinguishing thing when we talk about the deep state. Otherwise, it's just a rather shadowy, amorphous thing that we can't really identify, and it doesn't really give the American people anything to really grab a hold of, or anything to target, or any way of really knowing who's involved with it. We know that the Council on Foreign Relations is the key organization, and they're pushing for what? Global government, world government, always centralizing, concentrating the power of government.
Art.
Well, the thing about the deep state is that it is something that has been in the government of the United States since the Washington administration. Pure and simple. It's not something new. It is something very old, continuing over the ages, the 2.5 centuries that the revolution settled initially. But there are two main elements, one of which Bill touched on. They have two goals, and they never waver from these two goals. Now, they may have various issues in regard to this, but they all lead to these two, boil down to these two. One is a new world order. In other words, a single government for the world, or one world government. And the other one is the elimination of God. Now, you may not always recognize the aspect of the elimination of God in it, but if you prick the surface of the deep state, it's there. It's under the surface. It's a constant. Sometimes it's very subtle, and it transcends not only party lines, but other lines as well. People that you think are our friends, for instance, because they're sound on economics, will also be for these other two goals. We see that, for instance, on Fox News. There are a lot of people that are sound economically, but they're internationalists, and they really are not very religious people.
Before we move on, the codicil to the question, would one of you like to address the potential overlap or infiltration of the military surveillance complex with the deep state? Has there been permeation there, do we know?
Go ahead.
Very definitely. I mean, we can look at it a number of different ways, but we know from the beginning of what we generally think of as the modern military-industrial surveillance state, especially with the formation of the OSS and the CIA. We see two very important arms of the conspiracy at work there. The CIA is usually referred to, if you go to Wikipedia or any sources, as being our intelligence agency that was fighting against the Soviets in the Cold War, et cetera. It's anti-communist. Not true. When the CIA was formed and the OSS was formed, many of the people who were brought into the OSS were communists on the one hand and CFR globalists on the other. And they interacted together and worked together. In the same time, there were some anti-communists in there. And so I've interacted with a number of them who were pro-communist and those who were anti-communist. And it took some of these anti-communists a long time to figure out that many of the other people in the CIA and the OSS were really their enemies. They thought they were on the same team, but they said, no, these guys were working against us all the time. And it was always the big CFR cabinet members and the CFR industrialists who were putting these communists and globalists together in control of our intelligence agencies. They're both working to build a surveillance state which is really antithetical to, inimical of freedom. They want to use the apparatus of the state and all of the machinery and technology to smother and wipe out freedom.
The first official head of the CIA was Alan Dulles, who was a founder of the Council on Foreign Relations. They've never been free from this influence.
And that continues all the way to this day. If you look at the leaders of the intelligence agencies, just even in recent years, Michael Hayden comes to mind. He led both the CIA and the National Security Agency, the NSA, which listens to all your phone calls and stores all your text messages and your emails. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He attends the Bilderberg regularly, and he brags in public that they kill people based on the metadata that they collect. So this continues. You know, John Brennan, the guy who's running around calling Trump a traitor, is actually admitted in 2016 that he voted for the Communist Party candidate shortly before getting his security clearance, going to work for the CIA, and moving up the ranks so quickly that he became the leader of it. So the intelligence agencies and the military, to a large extent, have been very thoroughly infiltrated by the deep state and the deep state behind the deep state. That's not to say that everybody in these agencies is a deep state supporter or a deep state member. In fact, I know many patriotic constitutionalists who have worked in these agencies, and I always give that caveat when I give my deep state talk. Is, you know, I know not everybody in the CIA and the NSA is bad or doesn't like God or the Constitution. There's a lot of good people there, and that, I think, kind of gives a summary. You know, from what Bill started with to Art all the way up to now, from the 1940s, 1950s, the deep state people have largely controlled the intelligence agencies and big parts of the military. And I think with Obama's purge of so many patriotic military leaders, I think that accelerated.
One other point that I like to bring into this is that get up to Capitol Hill at least twice, sometimes 3 times a year to speak one-on-one with congressmen. And the last time Jim Fitzgerald and I were there, one of the congressmen sits on the Intelligence Committee in the House, and he said that there were a number of them that were very concerned about the intelligence idea of gathering, all these phone calls and emails and storing them, that they were concerned that they would be surfed for any reason, just because they wanted to do it. And they found out that the Republican leadership could care less. There are congressmen who are very concerned about this, but their own Republican leaders are fine with it in regards to the Fourth Amendment.
Moving on to our second question, we'll start with Bill Jasper on this one. What's the best and most efficient way for us as everyday Americans to expose the deep state to the American public?
Well, I think all of you would agree this is the best time ever. It's certainly been the best time ever in my lifetime. And it being active in the Birch site for the last close to 45 years, we've never had a better time. We've never seen a time where a president, a sitting president, a candidate and now a sitting president, has brought up our issues, has said what we've been saying since none dare call it conspiracy and before, exposing this to the American people, as Alex and Art have said before. We've never seen this before. And so we have not only that, but we also have never seen before the deep state in terms of all the intelligence agencies, all the levels of government coming out of the woodwork and demonstrating that, yes, indeed, we are a deep state. They're getting very bold and very brazen about it, where they're boasting about how they are going to resist Donald Trump, the president who's been elected. They're going to overthrow him. They're going to override him. They're going to sabotage him. They're boasting about this on the media every day. They're saying, we have thousands of us here in the government, and we don't have to care what the president says or what the American people say. So that makes it very easy for us to take our message out. And we don't know how long we're going to have that window of opportunity there. So we need to be getting all of our literature out on a regular basis, calling into talk shows and mentioning this, going on, if you don't comment on web pages, you get a news article on there, get on there and make a comment and link to a New American article, JBS webpage, and get the message out as many ways as you can on the increasingly controlled social media, Facebook, Google, etc. But any way you can on the social media, on the internet, talking to your neighbors, getting out the magazine. This is the time to do it.
All right, Thompson?
You know, the thing that as I pointed out in my new book, part of the deep state now are the leaderships of Google and Facebook and everything else. They're CFR members. They don't hide the fact that they are in bed with these individuals in the deep state at all. And so we have to realize that. I think, my own personal opinion about all the internet problems that we have, the solution for it is competition. If more and more people get in and start new sites, even start a new internet, which is in the works right now by one party, that's going to overcome a lot of this stuff because people are beginning to recognize these things. I'm going to mention tonight, I think that the odds that we have right now for winning are 50-50. Now, they may surprise you, but it's because people are now aware, but they're aware of the problem, they just don't know what's behind the problem, and they don't know how to take care of the problem. And that's our responsibility.
Alex?
Well, you know, I would just say keep birching, right? The John Birch Society puts out some amazing materials, has an excellent program, and I think the strategy works, right? You don't have to worry about every person in your community becoming a master on the conspiracy. Target opinion molders in your community, target the local business leaders, target the local talk show hosts and the newspaper columnists who are friendly. Work together with others, with other JBS members in your community, and get these materials out. And as we just said in our recent cover story about the censorship of the internet, we may not have the internet available as a tool for too much longer, at least as we have had for the last 10 or 20 years, which I think has been very, very helpful to the cause. And so we need to go back to, you know, retro ways of getting information out. You know, the John Birch Society has a long history of doing it very successfully. Get books out to the people who need to see them, get the magazine out, get DVDs out. A lot of people like DVDs. And, you know, I couldn't give this answer without mentioning education, right, Duke? You know, get your kids out of the government schools if you can. Put them in Freedom Project, because you know the deep state, I think their secret weapon is that they have control of the minds of something like 87% of our kids in the government schools. So as long as they can brainwash enough of them, whether we can expose the deep state to the older generations will become irrelevant. So we have to focus on the youth, and I think a big part of that involves education and you know, getting them out of the clutches of the people who want to brainwash them to accept the New World Order, the anti-God agenda, the anti-Christian agenda. And so that's what I would say. Just keep birching and protect the kids.
Let me further, go ahead.
Thank you.
Let me further point out that sometimes we assume that everybody in journalism and on the TV and everything else are on the other side. A lot of times it's simply ignorance. And it's up to us to establish friendships with those individuals and kindly and lovingly try and woo them over to our side. We have done this in the past. And when you do that, you'd be amazed at how you can get your things out there. Let me give you one example, if I may. A number of us befriended one of the individuals on our local television set who was the nightly newscaster. Between him and the individuals in the advertising department, we befriended a couple of people in that channel's advertising department. And after a while, it got to the point where it was obvious that they were starting to agree with us. So I was the head of the Support Your Local Police Committee in that town. And I testified in front of the city council. And they interviewed me, that channel, after I left the hearing. And then they had a program for local advertising that they said, hey, look, we cover the local news. So they gave 3 clips of examples how they covered the local news. So they had some woman and then they had some guy, and they were both silent. You know, you could see they were talking, but you didn't know what they were saying. And then they had me just coming out of this hearing, and they let me go on for about 6 sentences on the greatness of the Support Your Local Police program. And it was carried a dozen times a day for 6 months. You can't buy that kind of advertising. But it became something. It was a result of all that work of befriending these people at that particular local television station. If we'd had the attitude, oh, they're a bunch of liberals, you know, blankety blank, and we won't work with them, we never would have gotten that kind of publicity. So those are the sorts of things, lovingly, with friendship, approach your enemy. He may not be your enemy. You may not know, he may not even think that he's your enemy. He's just ignorant.
A related question, an important one, then we'll start with Alex on this. How should we answer when someone claims that the deep state New World Order is a crazy conspiracy theory? And that could extend to everything we do at the John Birch Society. How do we address those kind of questions, Alex?
That is a good question. I think, fortunately, the number of people who say those kinds of things is becoming smaller and smaller. In fact, I would now say that they are on the fringe of American politics. I mentioned a survey earlier in my first talk from Monmouth, I don't know how you pronounce it, university polling. They found that 74% of Americans are concerned about the deep state. That's up 25% from an ABC News poll early in the Trump presidency that found 50% of Americans were concerned about the deep state. So we now have the overwhelming majority of Americans recognizing that we have a problem, that we have a secret elite trying to manipulate policy and control our government. So I would say, first of all, use the same tactic that they've been using on us forever. Well, you're a fringe minority, so your opinion doesn't matter. Well, it turns out we're not in the minority anymore, so that's really good. Second of all, I would say, we're not even dealing with theories here, or even necessarily a conspiracy. Just open up David Rockefeller's book. Tell them to go down to their local library. He wrote right in there on page, I think it was 405. I'm proud to be a conspirator with a secret cabal working against the best interests of my own country to build a one-world political and economic order. David Rockefeller was the founder of the Trilateral Commission. He was one of the chief leaders of the Council on Foreign Relations, on the steering committee of the Bilderberg. How could you say that this doesn't exist? It's only if you deny the evidence. So I would say pick a few key pieces of evidence and point out to them that, hey, the American people are now coming our way on this, and so now you're the one on the outside, you're the fringe minority, and come join the winning team.
Bill Jasper.
Well, Alex has given us a wonderful resource with the deep state issue of the New American Magazine, and he has encapsulated in there what we've had in online articles as well, admissions by the deep state. So we can throw it right back at him. So are you saying that when Salon and Vice and Vox and Huffington Post and the New York Times have articles basically saying that we have the deep state and we're proud of it, and that we are sabotaging the Trump administration? Are you saying that doesn't exist? No, there is a deep state. It's widely recognized. You have members of the deep state boasting about it. You have them on TV, on CNN every night. People like John Brennan, Michael Hayden, all of the FBI and CIA agents that we've named that have taken up contracts with the various big media outlets. So the burden is on them to show that it doesn't exist. It's right out there in front of them. And the two deep state issues that we've done at the New American give plenty of quotes from those establishment sources corroborating that.
Art Thompson.
Well, let's set the stage first for getting them to read those deep state issues. Let's get a little more fundamental. Why not use the Socratic approach by asking them questions first, by saying, look, if those conspiracies don't exist, why is it that the federal government always adds conspiracy to the charge for every case they take to court? Another one is the mafia a conspiracy? Do they operate in secret or not? And here's even one more fundamental. A cheating spouse is engaged in a conspiracy. Are they not? Conspiracies exist at all levels through all facts of life. Our founders understood conspiracy. Our George Washington and others were very concerned about conspiracy. Not only conspiracy on the part of the British during the Revolution, but conspiracy by the Illuminati after the Revolution. In fact, John Jay, who was the Chief Justice of the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, chaired the New York Committee to detect and defeat conspiracies. The state had an actual committee to ferret out conspiracies and defeat them. You know, it's part of our history. So set them up to think for a moment, well, yeah, I guess conspiracies do exist. Okay, I've got a magazine now. Here it is on the big time. Here's a big conspiracy.
I'm going to invoke moderator privilege now and slip my own question in here because I really want to know. And we'll start with Art Thompson. One big name in all of this, it seems like the go-to villain here is George Soros. Can each of you speak to a little bit to the degree to which Soros's reputation as an agitator is overblown, underblown? Where do you put him in the scheme of this? And why has he been so effective in doing what he's done? Start with Art.
He's got money. But, you know, who built George Soros? You know, that's another question. Where did this man come from? Who got him started? Where did he get his money? Do you think that this man just was born a billionaire? No, we all know that he was born a very vile individual and helped round up Jews in Hungary and send them to the concentration camps and loved it. And so, but afterwards he was set up to become what he is today. He's effective because he has money and he puts it almost everywhere. I mean, it's almost like he's an old-time farmer reaching into his bag of seeds and throwing them out on the dirt. That's practically the way he uses his money.
Think about that graphic that Matt Shea showed you and all those bubbles linking back to Soros.
Yeah, so, but he's not the only one, nor has he been the only one down through the ages. We know that billionaires financed the Bolshevik Revolution from the United States. You know, when you talk about bankers and other people that financed the Soviet Bolshevik Revolution, we've always had the financiers in it, the Morgans, the Carnegies. All these guys were socialists or communists, all of them. How many read my book?
Alex Newman.
Well, you know, it seems to me that Soros is one of the insiders that we're allowed to hate. At least the conservatives are allowed to hate because, for whatever reason, they're okay with his name being out there. But as Art mentioned, Soros did not make himself, right? My friend and colleague, Joe Wolverton, constitutional attorney who also writes for the New American and is maybe one of the most fantastic educators that I know, did a fantastic article for the New American showing how the Rothschild dynasty helped set up George Soros for success, providing him initial seed money for his business empire. So you're not allowed to talk about the Rothschilds. Then suddenly you're crossing into territory that cannot be spoken. So we need to recognize that we're allowed to look at certain people and say what they're doing is bad, but there's always more going on behind the scenes. So I would argue that we need to look at that. We also need to look at who Soros works with. And, you know, Soros does, I think, play a very important role in the undermining of the United States, but he's only one side of the question. So I think we need to recognize that, because I think a lot of people on our side say Soros is the be-all and end-all of evil. You know, he is Dr. Evil and it's all Soros, and it's not. Right? He is part of something much bigger, and he is not the top of the food chain, not the top of the pyramid. And if we don't recognize that, I think we're missing the point.
Bill Jasper.
Just to build on what these two gentlemen have said, George Soros is undoubtedly very, very important in all these things. But what do you notice about almost all the groups that he funds? They're leftist Democrat, usually. I mean, and he's promoting openly homosexual, openly open borders, openly feminist, pro-abortion, etc. He doesn't give the most, but he does do it in the limelight where people like Herb Sandler and the Ford Foundation and others are more subtle about it. And so, many of these others do almost as much or perhaps more damage by funding Republican and so-called conservative and business organizations which are undermining our sovereignty and which are supporting issues that are taking conservatives mistakenly down the wrong path. So Soros is, of course, not active just here in the United States, but all over Europe, all over Latin America. And he is working very closely with and helping to start up many of these big corporate behemoths in China. And he is working very closely with them to spread their money subversively around the world. But he's not alone. The Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Sage Foundation, all of these others are doing it as well. They all work together in the Democracy Alliance, and they are allowing him to take the limelight because a lot of them don't have that same ego demand for the attention.
And touching on something that Bill did just a second ago, if George Soros funded a Republican or conservative neocon organization, it would give that organization away right away, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. So they have other people who fund the Republican side, the neoconservative side of this conspiracy. And we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so we're going to segue into the lightning round here. I'm going to ask everybody to keep their questions, their responses real brief, 30 seconds, and so we can get some more of these wonderful questions from the audience addressed. I'm going to start with this one. Ronald Reagan is thought to be, by the majority of Republicans and conservatives, one of our greatest presidents. Many seasoned Birchers know he was surrounded by the CFR. Was he a good guy gone bad, or an insider, or just misguided? Start with Art.
Well, in my suspicious mind, let me just answer it this way. What was his profession?
That's pithy. Bill Jasper.
I lived in California. He was the governor of California. He had pretty much the same record as governor that he later had as president. He appeared to be conservative as governor, but he wasn't. He helped sign into law, or he signed into law one of the most liberal abortion laws. He did many things that were contrary to his image, and he did the same thing when he became president because he was being run by other people.
Alex.
In his defense, I will say a lot of his quotes that he gave are still around today, and they're incredibly valuable in showing younger Americans the truth about what our country is, what our government is supposed to be. And without him, we might not have had somebody like that to show, our second graders, our fifth graders. So, I'll give those words in his defense.
What about Mike Pence? What sort of insider credentials does he have? Is he truly behind the Trump agenda, or is it more posturing? Would he make a worthy successor to Donald Trump or not when the time comes? Start with Bill Jasper.
Well, first of all, his record is less than sterling. He certainly isn't the strong personality. He doesn't have any of the backing, or I don't think any of the backbone that President Trump does. He was for NAFTA, and he's been for some of the other internationalist programs. So I think his posturing is largely that, and I think he is the backup. And that's why I would be worried if something were to happen to the current president.
Alex Newman.
Actually, I wrote an article in the New American right after he was named VP for Trump's campaign, and I asked the question: is Trump a globalist or a neocon or a patriot? Something along those lines. You can look it up. And I went through some of his record, and I think the jury is still out. I have my suspicions. He's done some good things and said a lot of good things, but then he's got some troubling stuff in his record.
Art.
Well, I think Pence was put on the ticket to give a moderate image to the harshness of the personality of Trump. I just think he's a weak sister.
And I'll add that Mike Pence was the very first governor, when he was governor of Indiana, to simply rename Common Core to deceive the people of his own state. Quickly, we'll start this time with Art Thompson. Can we trust Brett Kavanaugh when he was endorsed by Condoleezza Rice? Off to Bill Jasper. Just kidding.
Oh, that's fine.
No, go ahead, Art, please.
No, I've already said it.
Wow, that's the most confidence-building endorsement one could get. Yeah.
I think the jury's still out. A lot of troubling things in the record there. Ambrose Evans Pritchard, I think is his name, that Bill Jasper spoke of earlier, came out with an extremely troubling article just a couple days ago regarding Kavanaugh's work with Ken Starr on the Vince Foster investigation. So I have a lot of questions. I'm sure he's better than Ruth Bader Ginsburg or something, but I suspect the deep state probably has some leverage.
Okay, we'll start with Alex for this one. How does President Trump's renaming NAFTA appear to you? What can we say about that?
I think it's disastrous. I think it's probably a product of Robert Lighthizer, the Council on Foreign Relations member, who's the U.S. Trade Representative. I think, as best as I can tell from the brilliant articles that Christian Gomez wrote, this may be worse than the original NAFTA, if that's possible, and it's a whole bunch of the TPP. So, disaster. I hope it dies.
Bill?
Well, we know that the NAFTA replacement, what is it, USMCA, would be disastrous. This is going to be a real test case. What is Trump going to do? I am hoping, and if we go by some of his previous things that he's done, is that he is going to put thumbs down on it, and he's going to fire Robert Lighthizer. That would be the best outcome on it, that it won't even be sent to the Senate. And I think that's a possibility. I'm not going to stake my life on it, but I think that's a real possibility.
It's a defining moment in American politics. This is the worst thing. The Richard Haass, who is chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, says that it's NAFTA plus the TPP plus 10 to 20%, and that we need it now and then start in on doing the same kind of agreements with Japan and Colombia and everywhere around the world. So it's a very dangerous thing. It's far worse than NAFTA ever dreamt of being.
Last question of the day, and we're going to start with Art Thompson, Age Before Beauty Art. And get ready, get a good grunt ready for this one.
Okay.
What we want to know is, talk a little bit about the enigma that is Donald Trump. Is he co-opted? Is he flying by the seat of his pants? Would you say that already organizations within the government have started to control him? He's just such an enigma for so many people. Where do you see him in the midst of this discussion of the deep state?
Well, I think in his youth, he came in contact with a lot of Birch stuff in his youth. And we don't know about some of the comments that we've heard relative to his father being a friend of Robert Welch or not. We can't record that in any way. But I think I give the man the benefit of the doubt. But believe me, the thing that bothers me about it is his administration. He's got too many CFR members in there, people who have attended Bilderberg meetings, that sort of thing. In regard to this treaty agreement, they call it, I think he's listening to Robert Lighthizer instead of reading it for himself. It's 1,800 pages. I doubt he sat down in the Oval Office and started going through it page by page. But we'll see.
Bill Jasper.
The jury has been out on Donald Trump for ever since he announced, and since he came in, it's still really uncertain where he is going. But you look at the situation in which he came in, and so we're seeing it every day with all of the people within his administration who are coming out acknowledging that they're working against him. He's got thousands of people in all the bureaucracy who are actively working against him. He has his own Republican members of Congress working against him. He has many of the other Republican National Committee people working against him. And of course, all of the media and the universities and Antifa and the street radicals. So what would you do if you came into that position? I think, giving him the most benefit of the doubt, that he's trying to be very shrewd. He's moving people around. He's doing a lot of things. I mean, he's throwing everything out there, and it's causing a lot of the enemy to go berserk. He even puts in, this is what concerned us most, all these CFR, Goldman Sachs people. But you know what? A lot of them haven't lasted very long. He puts them in, and that kind of takes the pressure off here. He lets them in for a few weeks or a few days or a few months. Then he fires them, brings somebody else in. And if you look at that as being a strategy for moving from where we were to where you want to go, there's something to be said for that. And so I try to give the guy benefit of the doubt, and we watch him closely, all of these different events, and try not to judge too quickly. But I think that we still can't say with certainty.
Alex.
Where he is.
Well, as I mentioned in my speech earlier today, I think I've been very pleasantly surprised with a lot of what he's done. As you know, I went through a whole list of international organizations, UN agencies that he's withdrawn from or announced that we're withdrawing from. I think that's absolutely huge. I think that's really good news. But you know, this new NAFTA and some of the other things he's been doing, are really problematic. And so I think we as constitutionalists need to support him when he's right and oppose him when he's wrong.
Yeah.
By way of closure, let me just say that this is why there's no organization on this planet ever has been like the John Birch Society. No organization, no individuals will look you in the face and tell you more honestly the bleak things and still come out optimistic on the other side, because we believe in God and the free republic, and we believe in the American people. How about a big round of applause for our wonderful panel?
Thank you.